Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. From Hugh Curtis, the Minister of Finance in Victoria, we're going to find out whether it's good news or bad news, recession, depression, or recovery, as I discuss with him his latest quarterly financial report of what seems to be the beleaguered funds of British Columbia. Also on the program this morning, Tommy McGrath. Tommy McGrath is the kind of saint of the Seamen's Union, the man who's collected $7 to $10 million from backsliding foreign ship owners who bring their vessels into Vancouver, and is going to shock you by telling you that after the Second World War, Canada had the third biggest merchant fleet in the world, and today Canada has one full-time ocean-going deep-sea ship. And then, for the role of women in politics, Doreen Lawson, who is beating the country to find more bright women to go into politics in Canadian life. But first, Hugh Curtis, Finance Minister of the Government of the Province of British Columbia, after the break. Hugh Curtis is the Minister of Finance in the Social Credit Government of Victoria. Mr. Curtis, after all the doom and gloom and economists talking about a $700 million deficit in BC this year, and you talking about very great troubles, you've suddenly come up for the year end in the black, as I understand it. Can you please tell me at what cost to services and in taxation you're going to take from us to balance the budget regardless?
Well, Jack, first of all, good morning, and I'm sorry that I can't be in Vancouver, but Cabinet meets again in just in a matter of an hour or so.
Thank you.
And we have a series of Cabinet meetings going on. The forecast of, say, a $700 million deficit was not ours. We've had a lot of economists giving opinions through the course of this year, not only with respect to British Columbia's economy, to our finances, but nationally as well, of course. And so we're going to end in the black slightly, but not without some difficulty. You spoke, when you introduced this morning, the fact that we have quarterly reports.
Right.
And that, I think, indicates that the ability that we have, not only in reporting to the people of British Columbia every 3 months, but the ability that we have to identify a problem before it becomes very serious. We started identifying this, in fact, in the budget address and in the budget debate, which occurred just under a year ago. We knew that it was not going to be a great year. We knew that it was going to be a very difficult year, not only for government, which serves people, but for a number of people in the province. We saw that there would be difficulties in the forest industry. I don't think we saw housing starts in the United States down as severely as they finally turned out to be. We didn't foresee the depth of the recession in the United States. But we were able to make adjustments through the year on a week-by-week, month-by-month basis.
That's what I'm interested in, Mr. Curtis. At what cost? Now, I don't understand quarterly reports, but I know some things from it. I know that your resource revenue is down some 70%, I believe, in the forest industry, correct?
Yes, it's down very significantly, and so are natural resources.
And I know that your sales tax is down something like $65 million on your anticipated revenues.
We've seen a fall off, but when you put it all together, we are down slightly in revenue and we are up slightly in expenditure. In other words, it hasn't been a wildly erratic swing.
And you've been saved in your year-end forecast by two little bonuses. One your extra couple of $100 million underestimated by Ottawa in their payments to you, correct?
Well, there is constantly, and I'm having difficulty hearing you this morning, but I'll try my best.
Good.
There is constantly an adjustment in terms, and a lag in terms of dollars which are transferred from the federal collection agency, Revenue Canada. And so those adjustments occur on a regular basis, and that's not something new.
No, but the point I'm making just simply, Mr. Curtis, is that your $240-odd million extra from Ottawa has helped you greatly.
It certainly assisted in this particular year and in this particular environment.
I hope
so,
you can...
Again, we're going to finish the year in the black.
Good.
But only just.
I hope you can hear the next question.
I'll try.
I personally was considerably perturbed when you slipped through that wily increase on water leases for the BC Hydro and all water users in BC on dams, and I regarded that as a kind of sneaky way to get $100 million out of hydro for general revenue tacked onto everybody's power bills as really an undesirable and unfair charge.
Well, I heard you, as a matter of fact, I was relaxing with Sheila in Vancouver that particular morning. That was very early in January when you indicated your displeasure. The fact is that perhaps governments in the past should have looked at the amount charged for the water rental, and we've taken that step. We've been examining a number of fees and charges which are levied by users or for users across province, across government.
On that particular item, can you attack my deductions? You increase the water licenses through the hydro dams. It gives you, I said 100 million. I think you use a lesser figure, which you take out the back door of the hydro into your own coffers.
Well, again, I suppose it's a recognition. Either we are identifying areas where we can increase revenue without direct taxation, or we ignore those, and as a result, finally, in a panic later, as has happened in many years gone by, we have to increase taxes suddenly and without careful consideration. And that is a user fee. Now, I suppose you would respond by saying, well, that's a glib phrase, Curtis, and what do you mean by user fee?
It means that we pay.
Well, those of us who use pay, in fact. And if you identify that one in isolation, then I don't think you're being very fair, because we have looked at a number of other fees. I was shocked, and I've used the example before. I take my car to a government-provided testing station with qualified, skilled, professional people, with all the equipment in the world that is necessary to tell me if my automobile is safe or not, and if it isn't, how to fix it, and I pay $1.75 as a user. Now, a lot of people who don't own automobiles or who are not in a testing area, they're subsidizing me for $1.75. So we've increased that as well. And I think that you can't really, when you step back objectively, and you are objective, Jack, or should I say Mr. Webster this morning?
Say Mr. Webster this morning. I'm on the prod.
Okay.
Right.
You can't in objectivity say that that is unfair, because it is otherwise, it is simply passing the burden on to everyone in the province.
What I'd like to know from you, Hugh, and you may call me Jack, what I'd like to know from you is you've had to make many cuts in what people regard as essential services. Can you list them for me?
Well, I think you've made the accusation. You should list them. We haven't made many cuts in essential services. I'd like to know where we've cut. We have the largest hospital construction program in the province's history underway now, and some of those have been slowed just slightly, but not significantly.
Well, I can give you a couple of cuts. The hospitals, and I appreciate your incredible problems and have sympathy for them in your $2 billion health budget, but the fact is that 200 positions are unfilled in Vancouver General, 46 layoff notices have been given at the Royal Columbian, the paramedic service is being squeezed and no longer gives us 24-hour coverage on the 4 cars, and I appreciate the problem. And you're faced now with incredible demands from the BCGEU and the Hospital Employees Union.
Well, I don't want to anticipate what those demands may or may not be.
We know what they are. We can't anticipate the results.
We can't anticipate the result, and I stand corrected. But, Jack, the fact is that I think we have the greatest health care system in the world here in British Columbia and nearby in some other provinces. I think it's excellent. It does threaten, on a runaway basis, if some control is not exercised, it does threaten to bankrupt all of us. Now, that's a very delicate subject. One should not even consider, I suppose, talking about the possibility of restraining health care, the total health care system. The fact is that I don't think the people of British Columbia can, and I made this point with the Globe and Mail just a few weeks ago,
Right.
I don't think that we can simply accede to every single request that is passed down the line, not to the government, to the taxpayer, without real accountability in terms of having to find the money, and just go on and on as we have been. And you don't want a mini review of the costs that one encounters in the United States if one gets ill.
Right.
But really, you can, if unfortunately you become ill in British Columbia, you're certain of one thing, sir, you will not be bankrupted by that illness. And we want to keep the integrity of that very important principle.
Yeah, I get the message, and I do sympathize with you. The question surely is, we cannot afford unrestricted growth in the health budget or in any other budget, any other department this year.
That's correct, and that's the process through which Treasury Board has been going. We started in November. This has been a long and exhausting process, and the budget is not yet complete. Any speculation to the contrary notwithstanding.
We can look forward to tough times, restraint, and, I didn't ask you this, but I will, potential wage guidelines in the public sector.
We are examining, Jack, all aspects of government expenditure in British Columbia because we are thus far in this difficult period. We have moved through with relative ease, and that's a key adjective, relative ease. It has been tough. I know that our unemployment levels are high. But in the public sector, as an example, whether municipal, school, whether in the health area, or whatever it may be, in the public sector, we have an element of job security which is not found in the private sector. And I think a number of people are identifying with that particular disparity in these particular times.
Good point, you. We'll do one more short segment with the Minister of Finance from Victoria after the break. And back to my particular MLA, Hugh Curtis, who is, of course, the Minister of Finance. The conference in Ottawa must have been very disappointing to you, Mr. Curtis, the economic conference.
Well, my comments would be limited to the discussions which we had with Alan McKechnie. And if you express sympathy for me, then I think you would also extend that feeling to some other provincial ministers, many of whom don't have the room in which to maneuver, which is given to me at this particular time in BC.
In fact, to flash back a bit, how would you describe that McKechnie budget in one word, one clean, usable public word?
Unacceptable.
Dreadful, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and I hope none of your viewers think this is just another kick at Ottawa.
No,
But
I don't.
some of the best staff work being done, and after all, ministers of finance don't sit home at night after night, poring over every single figure, every single digit in a budget. The best staff work in Canada being done today, I think, is in a couple of the provinces, and one of them is British Columbia.
Well,
And-
self-praise is no praise at all, Mr. Curtis. But let's get back to a real point here. I get more opinionated as I get older, believe it or not, but I happen to be a great supporter of BC Place, the stadium, and was a supporter of Pier BC. Surely now you are in such not grievous, but tight financial position.
Tight is the right word, rather
That
than
you're
grievous.
going to have to cut back on what you call your mega projects.
No, as a matter of fact, we're not, because if we were simply working in annual compartments, Jack, I think we would be doing the future British Columbians a disservice. We have to look at projects which are going to offer a great deal of impetus in years to come, and that certainly applies to BC Place to an extent, of course, but Northeast Coal in particular. because Northeast coal is going to put us in a position where, while we have unemployment now, we're going to have an incredible demand for labor a few years down the line
But
when that comes on stream.
How much from your special funds, and I believe you've got somewhere between $700 million and $1 billion.
Well, you're looking at every single fund, and some of those, of course, are, to be very fair, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but some of those are trusteed. They're not available for simply taking on the spur of the moment or in a difficult period.
Understood, but on Northeast coal, for instance, how many millions are you going to have to pour in for the infrastructure against the allegations that the Japanese have outsmarted us on the pricing?
Well, I think the allegations are incorrect, and when I agreed to talk with you today, and I felt that it was important to do so after the quarterly, I was fearful of only one thing, and that was that we might start treading into items which would be more appropriate when the budget is brought down. And I'll be reporting with respect to 1982-83 fiscal in terms of Northeast coal and other projects at that time, and I know you'll have me in the hot seat a day or two following.
As long as, if we get that assurance that we will eventually know what we're putting in for the infrastructure and what you're getting or not getting from Ottawa.
Well, there's no question about that information being available. There's simply no question about that. That's not arguable.
Does BC Place stand on its own feet with its own borrowing powers without access to your particular provincial government funds?
BC Place has access to one of the Crown corporations in terms of borrowing, and that seems the appropriate way to go, again, so that it doesn't impact significantly on any given fiscal year. I think to do otherwise, again, if you're moving into a project of that size, one which will be around for many years, then you don't want to have incredible impact in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. So that's well taken care of.
I think this question is on your back right now. Such is the worry about employment with 25 to 27,000 lumber workers and some pulp workers not working anymore. Can we be assured that funds are available for the orderly development of BC Place?
Yes, there's no question about that. Absolutely no question about that.
There's no question either of Pier BC being brought back from the dead, is there?
I think that the government has made its position with respect to Pier BC and the Victoria Conference Centre, a much smaller one, very clear, and that has been reinforced and restated, and we're not discussing that at
right.
this time.
There's one final question on your quarterly report. What is your prediction for growth, and what will be your cash balance in the black at the end of the fiscal year in March?
Well, I gave best estimates with respect to the last question, and there can be any number of factors which will affect that. There may be some surprises on the revenue side or some disappointments. There may be some surprises, and I really hope not, on the expenditure side. We can have a difficulty in the Ministry of Highways, as you well know, with 2 or 3 problems in the coastal part of the province, and suddenly we've lost several $1 million.
Like
that can happen very quickly. Okay.
Understood. Now, what's your broad prediction for growth this year?
Growth in 1982, we're looking, and we're about mid-range between the most pessimistic and the most optimistic. And frankly, I think that's where I like to be in many respects. We're looking for about 2.8 real growth, 2.8% real growth in 1982.
Mr. Curtis, you've been in the government how long now?
Since this government was formed in December of '75.
Is this going to be the toughest year for cutbacks, employment prospects that you've seen in British Columbia?
No, I wouldn't put that gloomy a perspective on it. I think what we have done, and we've had a great deal of cooperation, we now have a clear understanding on the part of ministers in this government and of senior officials and managers in this government that expenditures must be contained. And that's why I'm here, and that's what I intend to do for so long as I'm here.
Just one last night, contained or cut?
Contained, because they are growing, so one wants to contain their growth.
Hugh Curtis, my thanks to the Minister of Finance of British Columbia. See you at the budget.
Okay.
After the break. Tommy McGrath. Tommy McGrath is president of the Seamen's Union, the CBRT, Canadian Brotherhood Railroad Trainmen and General
Workers.
General Workers Union. Tommy, we've met many, many long years ago, and I apologize for calling you St. Thomas, because some of your colleagues in the unions might pick it up and embarrass you with it. But I want you to tell me how many years now you've been nailing ships that have come into this harbour, failing to honour international agreements, and cheating crewmen out of their money. When did you start this ombudsman for the seaman business?
Our local's been on that campaign, Jack, for pretty well 10 years.
10 years?
10 years. And really we have picked up between $7 and $10 million. That's broad, but really that's the terms I have to put it in.
Oh, tell me a little more than that. Last year you picked up well over $1 million.
$1,135,000.
All right, if there's a ship coming in here under a flag of convenience, how do you know that they're cheating the men on their wages, and what do you do?
Well, you know, Jack, the ITF has approximately...
ITF?
Yeah, International Transport Workers Federation has approximately 1,600 ships under collective agreement. And of course, ship owners just sign agreements to get a charter party clause to deliver certain cargoes and then don't live up to them. And what they do with Asians and Africans and other parties, they have them sign two sets of books. One is the real rates of pay that they get, which might be $150 to $250 to $350 a month, and the ITF rates of pay. And incidentally, an ITF on a flag of convenience ship, Jack, now with his weekends will make $1,400.
So they have two contracts?
They have two contracts.
One is signed to show to the union to get the charter.
That's, well, to show to the charter party that they have a blue certificate that they can carry those type of cargoes, because many cargoes, and including a lot of lumber that goes out of here, have a request that a charter party clause must be signed. But not too many of them live up to it, and they fly by the seat of their pants and try and get away with it and get cornered between here and Australia and Sweden and Norway and Britain and many other countries.
And so when the ship docks here, you bring out the picket signs and tie up the ship?
The crew actually tie up the ship, really. We legally couldn't possibly do that.
But you tell them what the rights are and you encourage them to get the rights?
That is correct. And incidentally, Jack, even though we in Local 400, and my partner, Jerry McCullough, has been doing the work for the past couple of years, we couldn't be successful without the support of the maritime unions, such as the Longshoremen, the Guild, and the SIU, and the pilots, and the marine workers.
In the year for 1979, which I just happen to have handy, you picked up $1,630,000 back pay for seamen on ships.
That is correct.
Do they have to give you any proportion of that money? I mean, your union?
No, not really, no.
Can you remember what flag? Oh, you can tell me the flags of convenience that they were under.
Well,
read the lot.
You see, here.
First one is Japanese.
Here's one Japanese. Now, that's not a flag of convenience. That's a crew of convenience. Those were Filipinos working under a Japanese flag, which were cutting corners, incidentally.
And what's that PA one?
That's Japanese. Panamanian, Greek, Panamanian. Panamanian's a flag of convenience. Singapore is a flag of convenience. Liberian, a flag of convenience. Liberian, a flag of convenience. Singapore, a flag of convenience. Liberian again, and Singapore. And we've hit some of them ships 2 and 3 times.
And you'll keep the ship, or the crew will keep the ship here until the money is delivered?
Until the money is paid. And incidentally, to live within certain laws, the Filipinos have a law that, and unfortunately, Jack, Filipino seamen that go to sea must leave 70% of their money at home, whether they be married, single, or otherwise. And when a worker is going to sea at $250 a month and must send 70% home, and of course the Singapore government, the Philippine government does that to get American dollars for exchange. But the question is, a poor old Filipino is just like being incarcerated, if you want to look at it. He comes into the city of Vancouver and he's got $80 in his account. Where can a seaman from any country in the world tied up at Roberts Bank or tied up in Port Moody, where the hell can he go with $80 in his pocket in this day and age in the Canadian economy?
Nowhere.
It's like being in prison, really.
But what kind of retribution comes on these seamen who, under your encouragement, will tie up a ship for however is long, and then they get back on with the money? Is the money stolen off them again?
The money has been taken back from them, but we have a lawyer in the Philippines. We haven't got one in Hong Kong. But really, we do our homework fairly well and do the papers up correctly, and the Philippine government would like to take it all back, but unfortunately, they're not successful doing that.
All right. Does this ombudsman activity chase away certain ships from Vancouver because they know that if they're not up to date in their pay, they'll get chop?
Well, we hear shipping agents and people that represent the shipping world saying that ships don't come in here because of that. But really, Jack, when a ship has got a cargo and they're going to come and get it, if a ship from that company doesn't get it, a ship from another company gets it, and they come in with their phony books and they come in with their bad rates of pay, and they gamble, but they do intimidate people before they come in. They say, we'll give you $150 if you tell the ITF inspector that you got an agreement and everything is happy here. They do lots of things before they hit Vancouver, but really if they're going to a port down under in Aussie, New Zealand, or going to Sweden, they're going to get caught sooner or later.
Is Vancouver as tough as Sydney for dealing with people like this?
Vancouver, compared to Canada, is one of the toughest ports there is, yes.
Right, now down to our main order of business. What size of a fleet, merchant navy, did Canada have at the end of the Second World War?
Canada had, under a Crown Corporation, Jack, the third largest merchant fleet in the world, numbering about 300 ships. As a matter of fact, we had 50 British ships that were under British flag that were never even turned back to the Canadian flag. And in 1948, there was a commission set up with J.V. Klein being the chairman. And they were disposing of this Crown Corporation's assets, which was specifically ships. And they sold those ships for a song, as you know, and ship owners from Greek extraction were known to have bought ships and paid for them within the first 6 months or a year with cargoes they had, because incidentally, when ships were sold at that time, there was still a glut of cargoes around the world because the loss of the merchant fleet during the war was not replenished. And of course, certain people made certain ship owners rich at that time.
Listen, these were Liberty ships mostly.
Canadian Liberty ships.
10,000 tonners?
10,000 tonners or 4,700 tonners.
But useful and practical?
Useful and practical, and as much as, Jack, I think about the last one that was scrapped would have been scrapped about 6 years ago.
Well, there's a man called Papa Christidis.
Yes.
Didn't he boast in public about getting his start?
Yes, he boasted in public by being able to buy a ship so cheap. He thought it was novel that he was a Greek citizen at the time. It was amazing that he could buy a ship for $300,000.
Canadian ship.
A Canadian ship, and have 3 cargoes and pay for it. And he also, but
300,000, and he would lift 3 cargoes, and that would pay for his ship.
That would pay for his ship, yes. That's how cheap they got those ships, which were the ships, incidentally, that were built at a cost of $2.5 million then, in various prices, by the Canadian taxpayers in the various shipyards in Canada.
We had 300 and how many ships then?
About 300, Jack. There's a variance in numbers.
Right. How many have we got now, full-time deep-sea ships in Canada?
We really, as far as deep-sea ships for this great nation of ours, Jack, have one ship called the Arctic. One ship as far as a definite deep-sea ship is concerned. We have some great lake ships for upper lake shipping and various shipping companies that during the winter months go and sail to Europe and sail to Africa and sail to South America and take cargoes along the coast. But we really have one great big ship called the Arctic.
But it's you people, you, the union people, all the unions, that have prevented the building of a Canadian merchant fleet because nobody can afford to pay Canadian wage rates.
Jack, that is a complete lie, and anybody that signs their name to a document on that could never prove it. And incidentally, as you know, I've tried to get a meeting with the Council of Forest Industries. I've tried to get a meeting with Mr. Rust, who is the president of Crown Zellerbeck, which is a multinational corporation, to prove to him the statements he makes that Canadians have priced themselves out of the market. But for some unforeseen reason, Tom McGrath is too distasteful to meet with.
In other words, they don't want to talk to you.
They don't want to talk to me.
What they're afraid of is any form of unionization on their ships. Is that not so?
Jack, the problem why we haven't got a Canadian Merchant Marine boils down to one specific thing. There's a friendly government in Ottawa to the Council of Forest Industries, the grain people, the Manufacturers Association, and they don't want to get into the arena of collective bargaining. It isn't a question of wages. I have shown you documents where the Australian merchant fleet, which numbers over 2 million tons, pay wages in excess of Canadians and conditions, and are in the same markets that we should be in. So really the question of money, the question of repatriating ships is a complete lie.
More with Tommy McGrath of the Seamen's Union after the break. Well, I want you to continue to make a case, Tom McGrath of the Seamen's Union, because I've never been sold on it before, for a Canadian merchant fleet built in Canada carrying Canadian cargoes from here to other parts of the world. Who carries the cargoes now?
Well, actually, Jack, flag of convenience vessels, maritime flag vessels, British flags, Norwegian flags, and as you know, Seaboard is a a shipping agent as far as lumber is concerned for most of the lumber industry in this province.
They're the big ones.
And they have 2 ships on charter, the Skowbord and the Skaugren, 2 Norwegian ships, that, Jack, their wages are better than our rates of pay on contracts in Canada. Their leave factor, they work 14 weeks on. They are flown home for 10 weeks, which gives them a leave factor of 0.7, where
Right.
normally if we work a 4 and 8, we get a 0.5, which is a half a day for a day.
You work 8 and get 4 off.
That's 4 and get 8 off, John.
4 and get 8 off, that's
twice
right.
And really, I'm saying to you that they fly them home 4 times a year, which is a cost factor. The ships were built specifically for a run for 10 years between Vancouver and Japan, not to tramp around this world, but because the lumber market is down, they are now on the run to Australia. But really, why in bilateral trade should we not have one of those ships and the Japanese have the other one? Why should it be a Norwegian ship? Why should it be a British ship? And I'll tell you why it should be a British ship is that Seaboard, along with the rest of the multinationals, really don't want any collective bargaining and don't want to be dealing with any seamen's unions.
You're saying all the lumber that goes from here to Japan is carried in 2 Norwegian ships, specially built for the trade.
That is correct. That's not all the lumber, but that's the lumber for those ships, yes.
The lumber for those ships. And these guys have better contracts, better pay, and better conditions than any Canadian seaman.
They got better, they got a swimming pool, Jack, if you want to look at it. Have you ever looked at some of the environment we work in on the coast on ships?
No, I'm going to look at them. No, you and I have got an arrangement to look at some of
Fine.
the good ones and some of the bad ones.
Fine, Jack.
Now, let's go on from there, though. Who carries... Well, let's take the Canadian Pacific. Have they still got a deep sea fleet?
The Canadian Pacific has 38 ships registered now in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong has some real honest ship owners, but the question is that Hong Kong now, for some cases, has become a flag of convenience. And in my opinion, Canadian-owned ships registered in Hong Kong would make them a flag of convenience ship.
In other words, they are substandard wages and conditions on Canadian Pacific ships.
They're substandard wages to what they'd be paying if they were in Canada, but they have British officers in the main, they have Filipino, Hong Kong, and Spanish crews, and they are paying, they say basically British wages, but British wages are not North European wages.
Now, these are Canadian Pacific deep sea freighters.
Canadian Pacific deep sea ships, 38 of them.
38. Now, what about Canadian National?
Canadian National is involved, and incidentally, Canadian National, unlike CP, is a Crown corporation. Canadian National has 18% of its of capital into the Cass steamship lines, which there's an article there about it, and that even the Canadian ship owners are complaining. Cass steamships is registered in Great Britain and Bermuda, have a transatlantic run in other parts of the world, and really their money is in jeopardy because they're under a flag of convenience. And incidentally, if Cass goes down the tube, so does that 18% of Canadian dollars that CN has invested in there.
Crown Corporation in Canada, Canadian National, has got 18% in a shipping company registered in Britain and Switzerland. They're presently being tackled on a breach of contract by Canadian shipping people, and our 18% in Canadian National investment might go down the tube.
It's possible, yes, it's possible, Jack.
Why would Canadian National do that?
Well, Canadian National's following CN, you know. When Bandine came in, he cleaned up CN a little bit, but he did it the way Ian Sinclair did. They're both railroads for what they're worth, and they were both meant to be railroads, but now I wonder whether CP's got much to do with rail. They've got everything to do with everything else in the economic situation, but not rail.
Let's get back to the basic problem of building ships. One, I don't know if you can answer this, but can we build ships competitively with Korea or Japan?
We can build ships competitively with Korea if the government... We had a subsidy, Jack, after the war of 35%, and we built ships for all around the world. At that time, the Canadian ship owners and the Canadian shipyards weren't our ally and say that we want a Canadian fleet, because they were busy building ships for every country in the world.
everybody else.
Everybody else. Then the subsidy got diluted to 20%. Now the subsidy is down to 9%. And really, if you want to compare, and I'm the type that usually compare, if we can give $289 million to Chrysler Corporation to support an American auto firm, why can't we give $289 million to 5 or 6 shipyards across Canada to put Canadians to work?
Well, largely because Chrysler's in Ontario.
It may be in Ontario, but it's still an American corporation. And I say to you that if we can find $289 million to subsidize them, and which may go down the tube yet before we're finished.
Probably will, but let's ignore that for the moment. The fact is, you're telling me that a Canadian merchant marine could not be built in Canada without a substantial federal subsidy.
We say that at this moment. We do believe there has to be a subsidy. But I'm saying to you that subsidies are done by giving contracts. Subsidies are based on who takes the cargo from here to there. Subsidies are in different forms, but I say to you, we may need a subsidy to build ships. But really, Jack, who is subsidizing the Northeast Coal Project? Is that being built with fresh capital?
We'll come to that right now. Northeast Coal, let's take Kaiser Coal first, Southeast Coal. Who carries that coal to where?
Kaiser Coal have been carrying that coal for the last 10 years out of the southeast here on flag of convenience ships, Japanese ships, and other foreign flag ships.
Now, let me get back to my basic point. Wages, if your guys were the seamen on these ships, they couldn't run it. Or is there an answer to that argument? I mean, talking economically.
Really, Jack, today, crewing on a ship of 100,000 ton is running anywhere between 21 and 25. And crewing is not a question. And as I say to you...
Just a minute. You're saying, say, 100,000 ton cargo ship. One of the big boys.
Say a coal carrier.
A coal carrier. How many crew?
You could have a crew of 25 on there. I've seen less.
What would you have had in the old days for a ship that size?
Well,
for any
really,
ship?
there weren't any ships that size, Jack, but our old 10,000 tonners had a crew of 43.
For a 10,000 ton ship, you had 43.
43.
Today, for a 100,000 ton ship, they have only 25 max.
That's correct, yes.
Well, wages can't be the biggest factor by any manner of means.
Wages have been proven not to be a factor, and this is why the owners of shipping companies don't want to meet us on the basis that our argument is completely valid.
All right, what about the Australian fleet? And you told me that they have the best wages and working conditions of anyone?
I would say they match the best in the world, yes.
These are these big freighters.
Big freighters, yes. The Aussies have some big bulkers. Matter of fact, they just built one here in Japan, Jack, for delivering coal, the Howard Smith. And really, the coal from Aussie is being delivered by Australian flagships.
They have a contract that they take their coal to Japan in Australian flagships.
That is correct, yes.
Do we have a contract to take Northeast coal?
We met with the Minister Phillips in Victoria regarding ships we have 4 ships being built to deliver coal from Northeast.
Where are they being built?
There's 2 being built in Belgium and 2 in Korea. 140,000 ton.
Are they being built for the Japanese or for the mining companies here?
They're actually being built, in my opinion, for the Japanese shipping interest. But the question is, Jack, FedNav is the contractor that is supposed to have the delivery job, and FedNav is a part of Federal Commerce and Navigation out of Toronto and Montreal. That is also a Canadian company.
You're saying that right now they're building 2 giant coal ships?
Yes.
Oh, 2
4.
in Belgium?
2 in Belgium and 2 in Korea.
2 in Korea?
Yes.
To carry our Northeast coal to Japan?
With foreigners, yes.
With foreign seamen?
Foreign seamen.
Not a Canadian on board?
Not a Canadian.
Except by accident, maybe?
No, there wouldn't be any by accident. They just won't pick them up, Jack.
Just won't
They'll have a full crew of Koreans, or they'll have a full crew of Filipinos, or whatever.
Well, how did the Australians get the right to carry their coal to Japan as export sales in their ships?
You know, Jack, the Australian unions, the waterfront unions specifically, have been fighting their government consistently to retain its fleet and to build up its fleet, and have convinced either government, the Labour government or the Conservative government, they've convinced either one of them.
But they're tougher than you are, Tommy. What you're telling me is that the Australian waterfront union said, if it's not Australian ships, it won't go.
Yeah, they've said that, yes.
They've said
Yeah,
that.
that's correct, yeah, and that's the attitude to take.
Well, are you going to take that attitude?
Well, really, we're in a different situation. We're dealing from here coast to coast. We would like to take that attitude, but I really believe, Jack, we will take that attitude at Northeast Coal.
Tommy McGrath threatens that unless they make some contracts for Canadian bottoms or Canadian crews on foreign bottoms, you might well say no coal to the north from Northeast to Japan.
That is correct. But maybe some common sense will come out of that gang over in Victoria.
After the break. I'm looking at an ad by Tech Corporation and Denison Mines. They've got the contracts for the Japanese coal from the Northeast. Canadians will be the major beneficiaries of the Northeast coal development. And they've got a big ship on it. Who will sell that ship?
Well, I would say a crew of Koreans, Jack, or a crew of Filipinos, but there won't be no Canadians there up till today's date. And I find that ad a bit misleading to say in long-term benefits for Canadians, because we are Canadians, we seamen, you know, and we get nothing out of it.
When I interviewed you many years ago about this, I was kind of unsympathetic because the shipyards were busy, the unemployment was good, the employment was good, and all the rest of it. Do you think you'll get a better hearing all round now with economic recession on the immediate horizon, if not here in a major way?
You know, Jack, what bothers me whenever we tackle the government in this situation, especially Otto Lang. I heard Otto Lang speaking at international conferences and national conferences, and he had said that for Canada's best interest, it's best to be without a merchant fleet. What bothers me is that I turn that argument around. Here he is speaking to foreigners that have ships in their small countries in West Africa and Europe, and every country in the world has ships that borders on water, except Canada, which is the largest coastline in the world and the 7th largest exporting nation in the world at times, and we have no ships. I think it borders on treason, if you don't mind.
Who carries the American grain and wheat and barley and seeds and all the rest of it?
Actually, the Americans have 13 million tons of shipping. And the question of American grain is supposed to be carried in American bottoms because it's a government cargo under the Jones Act. But what happened when they had the deal with the Soviet Union 7 years ago? There was not enough bottoms to carry it, so they relinquished that situation. But there's another grain deal to come up before the Polish conflict, and they were discussing that they wanted a guarantee of 1/3 of American ships to carry the next grain deal of the Soviet Union if and when they have it.
And do the Soviets supply ships, or do they just take charter ships from around the world?
The Soviet charter ships from around the world.
Do we have any protection on the shipment of our grain? Silly question. Around the world.
No, we have no protection. We have cargoes that...
No ships?
No ships at all.
No protection?
We're at the mercy of foreign ship owners. And I'm going to tell you another thing, Jack, that these low wages that are paid to Asians and Africans, if a ship is under charter and they're paid for demurrage sitting out in English Bay at $5,000 to $6,000 a day, I would suggest you, a ship owner with a crew of 25 people, would make money laying at anchorage than he would if he was taking the cargo and getting away with it.
In other words, he gets more from his demurrage because of his...
Because he's sitting around with no cost factors.
With a cheap
rates
labour
of pay.
crew.
That's
cheap
right.
labour crew. All right. If you were the Minister of Transport, which you won't be, what size of a fleet should we have? Should they be big boys, 100, 120,000 tons?
Well, I think we have to start off with, Jack, with bulkers to deliver our grains and our lumber and our coal, and I think that's the first step.
Go ahead to Tom McGrath.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking is that, isn't it true that Canadian steamship inspection is so harsh that it would cost just too much for us to put our ships up to standards if we had Canadian ships? And plus the fact that it makes sense to have foreign ships because Filipino crews can be brought for next to nothing when our crews would cost so much.
Well, they can't be brought for next to nothing if Tommy finds out they're breaking the ITF agreement. But answer your question,
What
Tom.
I want to say to that caller is that sounds like a call from an owner, if you don't mind, on the basis the owners here are always complaining about CSI, but if anybody has to look at the vessels we're living in, working in for noise, accommodation, and if anybody wants to look at the 2 disasters on ships on the St. Lawrence River, I'm certainly critical of the CSA, and I question whether their standards are tough enough for some bad ship owners in this country.
Thank you. Before I take this call, have we any merchant Navy colleges which train people for deep sea shipping, or just a little thing we have for the ferries?
Jack, we have a college just built over in Victoria that was down over in North Van that was actually built to train seamen. And really, you're only going to train them to work on the coast, and really that's another contradiction on the question of training young people. Where can they go? They can work on a towboat or work on a coastal freighter.
Or a ferry?
A ferry, that's about it, yes.
Go ahead, please.
I'd like to ask Mr. McGrath if he knows about the SIU trying to get a deep-sea fleet organized as well as him, and does he know about the ship that was brought over and the circumstances surrounding it as to why we lost it, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I would say we lost our fleet in '49 because we were scabbed on by the SIU for what that's worth.
Don't be outspoken, Tommy.
And the other question is that as far as whether the SIU is after a merchant fleet or not, jointly we are after a merchant fleet, but if you want to ask Roman Gralowitz, the meeting we had with the ITF in London 3 years ago, his position on CPR versus my position, you may get the answer what we're after.
Well, give me Roland Gralowitz of the SIU's position. You were hammering the CPR. You wanted Canadian ships to carry that stuff.
That is correct.
What did Gralowitz do?
Jack, we had a meeting in Ottawa, and we brought over the ITF, who are the mediator between us unions because we're affiliated to the ITF. McGrath and his union's position was front and center to tell that CP to bring the ships back to Canada. Roman Gralowitz's position at that time categorically was not my position.
He wouldn't do it.
He
wouldn't
said,
back it.
as a matter of fact, in fairness to Roman, a statement he'd made, he said if he was a CPR, he may not bring the ships back himself. That was his opinion expressed.
Will he support you in a joint approach to the federal government?
I want to say this, that the SIU, the Canadian Merchant Service Guild, and the waterfront unions and ourselves are concerted to bring the ships back, but when people ask me pointed questions, I'll give them the right answers.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm talking about
Oh, that was a noisy line. I didn't cut you off, sir. Nor did anyone here. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I'm glad to see you finally got a decent union man that's fighting for some good Canadian jobs. Morning, Tommy. I sailed with Tommy there a good while ago, and he's quite correct when he stands to say that our ships and the ships that Tommy and I worked on this coast and deep water together, we were under one of the worst conditions in the world compared to the Australian ones. I lived down in Australia, and I worked on the Australian ships down there and their dredges, etc., and their tugs. And by God, the owners here wouldn't get away with what they get. The owners here would never get away with it if they were trying to sail the same ships down on the Aussie coast, because they just don't put up with it down there. The Australian seamen's is one of the toughest in the world, but the conditions that they're fighting for are only just conditions. The conditions that we sail here, noise in the engine room, and and having the engine right alongside of your bunk, and water leaking through,
we'll take
dreadful conditions,
We'll take that as read, but you presumably support Tommy on his position about a merchant fleet for Canada on the coasts.
Yeah, it's about time we stuck up like the Australian longshoremen and the rest of their boys down there. They stick up for their rights, and here it just seems we're selling our lifeblood away. We're giving away our coal. Canadian taxpayers are paying to ship it out, and it's going on foreign bottoms, and there's not even a Canadian job involved.
Okay, bye. Disagree?
That's fine. I agree with the caller.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Webster. I'd just like to point out to Mr. McGrath that the bulk of the Canadian Pacific Fleet is registered in London, not Hong Kong, and is thus subject to all the DTI regulations, such as safety and such like. And that in the very near future, something like 10 of those ships will be manned by British ratings and British officers.
Okay, just hold on a second.
Caller, what I want to say to you, caller, that the bulk of CP ships were originally registered in Bermuda, and there was 8 registered out of London, and they've been registered out of London for years, and those that are registered in Hong Kong were the ones that got chased from Bermuda to Hong Kong, so your facts are not correct.
You're wrong, Mr. McGrath. I will tell you that something like 30 of the Canadian Pacific ships are registered in London.
Well, British ships, that's right.
Yeah, but Bermuda's a British flag, Jack.
Oh, Bermuda is a British flag. Oh, I see
They are not registered in Bermuda. They are registered in London, and they have London on the stern of those ships.
They were registered in Bermuda up till a year and a half ago when the Bermudan unions chased them out of there.
Oh, not the Bermudan unions, I don't think, but never mind. But they are now registered in London.
That's a British opinion.
Okay, thank you. Where am I? Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Oh, I've got to take a break. Do hold on a second. Back with Tommy McGrath of the Seaman...
Out of the 34 ships, Jack.
We'll do that after the break. After the break. Just to recap with Tommy McGrath of the Seamen's Union. Your position is quite adamant now. We've gone from 300-odd ships to 1 full-time deep-sea ship. Do you really think now is the economic time to press for a Canadian merchant marine using perhaps the Australian-type strong-arm tactics of not letting Northeast coal go unless it's in Canadian bottoms? One of them, anyway.
Jack, strategically, people would say that's the wrong time to react. But really, we've been without this fleet for 30 years, and it doesn't matter about time. It's time we reacted, and it's time government listened to us, and it's time the Canadian taxpayers understood that this great nation of ours, that is supposed to be one of the most best recognized nations around the world, is unlike 83 other waterfront nations. They haven't got any ships. It's unbelievable.
We've got the goods, we've got the money, and we export the stuff, but we don't insist on any Canadian registered shipping.
That is right, and I'm going to tell you there is an UNSTAD situation where on ships there should be 40-40-20, Jack. And the 40 means 40% on your ships, 40 on the trading nation, and 20% for the freebooter. And this is coming into effect because enough nations have agreed with the UNSTAD. But I say to you seriously... UNSTAD. United Nations.
I see.
And the question I say this is that I just find it completely impossible to believe that we can have 2 Norwegian ships chartered for 10 years to run between here and Japan, except for the slow down the lumber industry, and carry goods that belong to Canadians and Japanese. Those jobs belong to us Canadians. And to answer my British friend here a moment ago who said those ships are registered in London, as far as I'm concerned, that the British flag is a flag of convenience if it's on a Canadian-owned ship.
When the red ensign is on a Canadian-owned ship, it's a flag of convenience.
It certainly is. It's recognized by that around the world. CP ships are Canadian-owned. What the hell would they be doing being registered in Britain or the United States or Japan or whatever? They should be registered in Canada.
But then they'd face union organization from the likes of you.
That is correct, and that'll bother them.
How much less do Canadian Pacific pay than, say, the Australians, broadly speaking?
Well, the Canadian, in 1978, Jack, and this is a clear incident of what the international movement think of CP ships. In Finland, the Fort Hamilton, which is named there, was held up by the Finnish unions. And the ITF inspector phoned McGrath and he said, "McGrath, what do you want me to do about it? They're paying less than ITF rates of pay." I said, "Do what the ITF would do." And they held that ship up there for 2 weeks and forced the CPR to put into a pot the money that was the difference between British rates, which were low, compared to ITF rates, which were correct.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to propose that maybe it's a fact that the unions are so strong that the companies are afraid of strikes every time they turn around. Look at the longshoremen. They go on strike in the early 70s. They cripple the shipping industry. They cripple a lot of small tugboat outfits. And, as a result, a lot of small companies are afraid to make a move because they're afraid of another strike that could just wash them right out. I propose it's not the wages that scare a lot of foreign companies, a lot of foreign investment. It's a fear of strikes.
Tommy?
Well, first of all, my friend, in 1970 the longshoremen weren't out on strike, and the longshoremen's record of strikes is known, and it isn't that great. And all I want to say is that the question is that if you have collective bargaining, you have the right to go on strike, and until that changes, I haven't got any answers. But I really say to you that as far as Canadian seamen strike, and we had a strike in 1949, but we didn't have a strike. We were led into a conspiracy to destroy us, and we were destroyed along with an American union and the ship owners in the Eastern Seaboard and the Canadian government.
Are you going back to Hal Banks?
I'm going back to 1949, Jack. I spent 9 months in strike. I know all about it. I was on a ship, Jack, in South Africa. I had $385 that I'd already earned before April the 11th of that year, and the boss confiscated my money along with all my colleagues on that ship.
You never did get it.
We never did get it. The Canadian government put it someplace.
But his point was stronger than that. His point was that a climate has been created here whereby even reasonable progressive employers might say, "Oh God, no, not unions, more strikes."
Yeah, well, really, Jack, I haven't really to give you a correct answer on it. If you don't get the right kind of agreement, you have the right to take that action. And if the employer don't like the action you take, he also has the alternative to lock you out.
Okay,
it's a two-way street.
That's an honest response. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I'd like to make a couple of points, and I hope you won't find them too irrelevant.
No.
My husband worked in the Merchant Marine for a couple of years, and my brother-in-law still does. And I would say one of the biggest problems would be the leave system on a lot of the ships. And you've mentioned a couple of companies, foreign companies that have good leave systems. I think that companies where there's 4 months on and 2 months off, or 8 months on and 4 months off, it's just very detrimental to a marriage and family life, and this is one of the biggest problems that we found.
Is that a problem you think you'd face?
What I'm saying to you seriously, caller, that the Australians have a ship that runs in here every 60 days, Jack. The crew make one trip and they're off. And what that factor is that they work an 8-hour day and they get a day off for every day they work. And that's unique because if we work on the coast here on an 8-hour operation, we get a half a day off. Or if we work in the towboat industry, when we work a 12-hour day, we get a day and a quarter off, where we're out 2 weeks and off 2 weeks. But I'm telling you that the Australians have the best leave factor for seamen around the world, and they're surviving.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
I would like to tell your man there, Tom McGrath, that there is no way that Canada can build any type of a shipbuilding industry or anything because we have not got the craftsmen around, nor have we got the merchant marine officers to go ahead and operate this sort of a fleet.
Tommy?
Well, Jack, you know, that's the question is, I never thought seamen would happen to be scientists, but really we have a marine school over in North Vancouver. We have, what I want to say, we have a ferry fleet running with officers. We can certainly get people. We're talking we ain't got people to cover the coal project. We maybe ain't got people, but that's not a problem with the seagoing situation. That's a problem with our whole country and both governments, whether they be federal or provincial. But I want to say to you that if we ain't got nations, everybody tells me we're one of the advanced nations. Can they explain to me how all the backward nations in Africa and Asia have got ships?
Tommy, you've been very forthright. We'll have you back again. I want to see this Australian ship when it gets into harbour, and I want to see some of the bad conditions in some of the other ships. My thanks to Tom McGrath, President of the Seamen's Union. And I'll be back with Doreen Lawson on women in politics after the break. Statistically, it can be proven that women do not play their fair share of the political game. That, of course, is their fault. And I will brook no contradiction. But there are some women around, and they're sometimes difficult to keep up with. For instance, Pat Carney, Pauline Jewett, Flora MacDonald, Arola, Bijan, Sauvé, Campagnola, Holt, Brown, Jordan, McCarthy, Daly, Sanford, Wallace, Yvonne Coke, Margaret Ford, Nellie Boyce, and May Brown, Pauline Weinstein, and Doreen Lawson. I missed a name in that. Would you believe that? Yeah. Margaret Mitchell. My apologies to Margaret Mitchell. Now, Doreen Lawson, how long have you been in politics?
For 11 years.
What kind of politics have you been in? At which ones have you been successful, and at which ones have you failed?
I have been elected in 6 successive elections to the position of alderman on the Burnaby Council, and I have failed in my attempt to become elected to Parliament in 2 elections.
For the Liberal Party? For
the Liberal Party.
And do you regard that as the greatest failures of your career, or was that merely a step in your political growth?
I think that was an experience.
An experience?
Yes.
Now, look at that. These are just pictures we happen to have available quickly this morning. Mm-hmm. Can you give me any information on how active women really are in politics? There seems to be an awful lot more about than there used to be.
Yes, there are more about. There is an improvement, but if you take a look at the record, in Parliament, 5% of the seats in Parliament are held by women. In the provincial government, BC provincial government, and in municipal politics, about 10% of the seats are held by women. So there's a great gap there and a great need for more women to become involved.
Why are women not so politically conscious and pushy when it comes to political action and political parties, on the face of it?
Well, I think there's 2 aspects. One is attitude. I think women aren't trained to be as aggressive. Women aren't brought up to work on a team basis with games and the kind of things that men are. And there's a matter of the practical aspects. When it comes to the economy, women are at the bottom of the barrel and can't afford in many times to run for politics. And women don't have a wife to stay at home, to keep the house together, to buy the groceries and to look after the children.
Well, they don't have to have children unless they want to have children.
Of course not.
So therefore, it's one of the key rules to be a woman politician that you must decide not to have children.
No, I don't think that's so. I think having children gives you an education that you can get no other way. And that's useful when you get into government in coordination and cooperation just with the people you work with. I think it's an advantage.
But there's another thing, too. You haven't done a political analysis of which parties the women run for. I mean, you couldn't tell me whether more run for the... Fewer seem to run for the Tories.
Yes.
And more for the NDP, I would say.
Perhaps because the NDP is oriented towards the social issues.
And perhaps because if you're an NDP, you generally have some basic political principles which you can't find in the free enterprise parties.
Well, you can find some of those in the Liberal.
All right, now what are you planning to do about preparing yourself for a career in politics?
Well, I'm conducting a course out at UBC on March the 13th. And it's an overview on what women can do to prepare themselves and to have a look at what they can do personally and what they can do within the system and within a party and the mechanics they would go through in a campaign.
This, of course, is a course which indulges in discrimination?
Of course.
Women only?
Women's Resource Centre. Some of the men have complained to me that they need it too, but in this case, UBC are putting it on strictly
For
for
women. How much?
$35 per course.
$35?
There's 2 courses. Well, the second one is making your way through the governmental system.
Just for one day?
Each is 1 day.
And I see you've got
On
to
the
take your
20th.
own brown bag with you.
Yes, you do.
Got to take your lunch. Okay, let's take questions from women on the telephone right now about why they would like to go into politics and why they wouldn't touch politics as a woman or as a politician with a barge pole. Are you going to concentrate on the municipal level?
Yes, the examples are going to be on the municipal level, but the principles apply on any level.
But surely municipal level is the toughest.
Yes, yes it is. You are directly you're within arm's reach of all of the electorate. They can phone you up at any time, see you at any time.
And you can't just talk about broad issues about nuclear disarmament or national budgetary politics. You've got to deal with a woman down the street.
You have to know what you're talking about.
Webster and Doreen Lawson, Women in Politics. Your questions after the break. Before I take phone calls, yes, there are some. Before I take phone calls, I'm going to tell you something about Doreen Lawson. She taught me a word. I think it was you. I remember a number of years ago, you put up a billboard in Burnaby. And on it, there was a word I had not heard before. What was the word?
I have no idea.
Ecology.
Ah, the environment.
Weren't you involved in that?
Yes, Burnaby Lake is a wildlife sanctuary, saving creeks and streams and trees.
But it said ecology, because I remember asking you, you know, what ecology was. I'd never heard of ecology before.
That was a long time ago.
Well, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Today you're speaking where?
I'm speaking at the Women's Resource Center on Robson Street for the UBC, again, Women's Resource Center, and it's on changing the environment through the political system. How about that?
What do you mean changing? That's double talk.
Well, I didn't print a brochure, but it's not really. I think you can change the environment through the political system in a variety of ways, either as an individual or in groups.
You're talking about ecological environment?
Yes, energy. Energy, land, sea, air, recycling of garbage.
Don't you think that from here on in people will be so worried about jobs and production and wages that the ecology and the environment is going to move into the back of the room?
That's a problem. It tends to move to the back of the bus at times of economic stress, but it's still a need.
Okay.
You still have to be alert.
Go ahead to Alderman Lawson.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
My question is not really directed to you. It's a statement I'd like to make.
Okay.
In the gallery of good-looking ladies flashing by, I failed to notice one lady who is working very hard in politics, although she has not been elected. And that's the leader of the Liberal Party in BC, Shirley McLaughlin.
I expected Shirley to phone. She often phones in this program. We didn't have a picture handy of Shirley. In fact, I'd be interested to know what other women I missed out. There must be hundreds. We just went through the computer this morning and whipped up some easily available pictures of well-known women. We apologize to dear Shirley.
Well, poor Shirley needs all the help she can get.
She certainly does.
People laugh at women in politics, I think. They tend to ignore us. And I think Shirley McLaughlin is working very hard right now.
All right, how tough was it for you, Doreen Lawson? How many years were you ago since you first were elected?
It's 11 years ago, and I had to run 3 times, but men have to run 3 times too. Harry Rankin ran I think, over 6 before he got in.
But you ran 3 campaigns, as
Yes.
an independent or with the party?
An independent the first time, and then with a Burnaby group for the next 2.
What is your biggest most simple piece of advice to a woman who decides to run for school board or alderman?
Be persistent, be consistent.
And be a door knocker?
Yes, that too.
But just a minute.
Talk to a lot of people.
Where should one start on a political career?
I think you start by joining a political group so that you have some idea of the mechanics of a system, you have some idea of the jurisdictions of the governmental position that you're heading for.
So did you first of all join a political party?
No, I didn't. I started in another way. I started as, I was active in a community group, and that's an excellent way for women to get political training.
What's a community group?
A United Way. I was president of United Way. I was chairman of the United Way fundraising campaign to begin with. Then I went on to the Burnaby Parks and Recreation Commission and ultimately became chairman of the commission.
Oh, you bought Father Archbishop John's place.
Aye, we surely did.
Do you remember Archbishop John?
Not personally.
The Temple of the More Abundant Life.
Yes, and he went down to South America.
Yeah, I went to California first. That was a place where everybody had to sleep north and south and eat off blue plates with good vibrations. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Temple, I see it every now and again, the Temple of the More Abundant Life.
Yeah, we've kept the building
Are you
intact.
in public life, ma'am?
Pardon?
Are you in politics?
I joined the party,
Which party?
Liberal.
Oh, of course it was. You were plugging Shirley. Thanks very much, Shirley McLaughlin's friend. Go ahead from Port Alberni.
Alberni, sir.
Albany.
Yes, good morning. I saw you, Doreen, I guess at the conference on pensions just lately. And I feel, and I'm asking this question of Doreen too, don't you think that the women themselves don't support other women? For instance, I was the candidate for the Nanaimo Alberni Liberal Association the last election, and I was the only woman candidate out of 6. And I felt that I really, if the women that got behind me, I really had the opportunity to get in there and work for all of Canada, not just Western Canada. And the thing is that not only was I the only woman of 6 candidates, but also I'm bilingual. And if the women would only, practice what they preach, sometimes there's no reason why I couldn't have been in there, or you, Doreen. And what a difference this could have made to the policies that are presently being practiced in Ottawa.
Well, there are times when the points you make are discouraging, but I think that women tend to vote for a candidate first, and then if you're a woman, second. And those of us who ran with the Liberal Party went out with the tide. There weren't any men who got elected either.
That was fair enough, but you said something significant earlier. You said that women are not capable of functioning in a team. Not quite that, but that was the message I got. Why is that?
They're not trained to function in a team. They're trained to be a little more passive and not so aggressive. And belonging to community groups is a way of learning how to work with a team, and ultimately if the women become president and chairman.
How many years of
it works
liberation
better.
have you had now? Surely you can't sit there and tell me the women are not trained to be. I know many aggressive women, goodness gracious me.
I think you'll find that the number of women in professions and in education are growing, and then I think you will see that reflected at the government level.
Okay, next call is where? 3. Go ahead to Doreen Lawson, please.
Mrs. Lawson.
Hello.
I think that I've watched your career on council, and it's my impression that one of the reasons you're so successful is that you're a full-time alderman. What advice would you give women who can't do that, who can't arrange their lives to be full-time aldermen, and yet would like to participate?
You mean to run for public office or just to be active?
Yes, who have to do it on a part-time basis. How can they organize so that they can do that?
Well, I would suggest, first of all, some days I work full-time, and other days I deliberately work part-time because there are many other things in life to do. I think that they have to have an arrangement with their families. At some point, if they become elected, they're going to have to get help in the house. It's the same as if you have a full-time job anywhere else. It's impossible to do 2 jobs, even a job and a half, really well. They have to do a lot. They have to have a lot of shortcuts. They have to have their wardrobe coordinated. They have to be well organized within the home. Everybody has to know what everybody else is doing.
Do they have to have money?
They have to be super
And they have
administrators.
to have money.
That helps.
Is this the kind
Otherwise, if they don't,
about
otherwise they have to have a family that's very cooperative. A husband that, if indeed they have a husband, that is supportive and will do his share of the housework. And notice I say his share.
You mind your own business. Ed and I both do our share of the housework.
Which is very little, which isn't your share.
I've changed many a diaper, I'll tell you that.
Have you? Yeah.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. From Kamloops, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm interested in I'm 61 years of age. I've raised 5 children, and I'm toying with the idea of going into the political field of some kind, whether civic or with the NDP. Now, the thing is, age 61. Well, it's kind of old, but I've 3 have graduated from Simon Fraser, and 1's BCIT, and a son at home. And now I'm 26. Well, the son is 26. I'm sitting, doing nothing. And at this present time, I feel like I would like to get involved.
Okay, let me ask a question. Is she too old to get into politics?
I don't think so. I think it's a matter of attitude, not age.
61?
Yeah.
Getting on a little
Energy
bit.
depends. She got the energy to go through a long day.
Which is the easiest thing to get elected to? Get appointed, first of all, say, to a local commission?
Yes, I would say so. Although you're better off to have a good grounding in a political party. I think that's an advantage.
Go for the school board first, or go straight for alderman?
No, I'd say go straight for alderman.
I've been in a lot of community work, and I date back with the NDP as far as old man Winch.
Okay, then go for a position. And you may not make it the first time, but try.
I've been
Keep
the
trying
president
over and over.
of this and that, and a very well-organized person, you know. I consider myself anyway.
Sounds like a good candidate.
I feel that I have something to give, you know.
Wonderful. Well, get out there and go for it.
Good. Bye.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have 2 points to make, Jack.
Yeah.
First off, your receptionist, I'd like to tell you she's doing an excellent job. She's very courteous. And the second thing is I would run for probably the school board, as I have a newborn, and I figure I have 5 years to straighten out the school system.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't listening. Go ahead.
Yes, I don't think that was a question. You said you'd like to run for school board. Well, then, do you live in Burnaby?
No, I'm in Vancouver.
Okay, well, you have organizations in Vancouver that would assist you to run. You're better off both economically and physically in your energy.
Oh, I'm down to
better
10
off to
seconds
run
quick.
with a group.
I'll tell people when the thing is after the break. My thanks to Doreen Lawson. Doreen Lawson has these courses at the Woodward Building, Saturday, March the 13th and Saturday, March the 20th at UBC, Women in Politics and Finding Your Way Around the Government. Thanks, Doreen.
You're welcome.
Tomorrow we're going to have Chapeau Roland, very famous Quebec politician and journalist, Benno Friesen and Lon Nystrom. I'll be back tomorrow. Solange Chapeau Roland, I'm sure the name is, I should know it. I'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.